The Ivory Coast in West Africa is in turmoil. Months after elections there caused a change in the political makeup. The incumbent President Laurent Gbagbo and forces loyal to him have failed to step down to new President-elect Alassane Ouattara, resulting in conflict with the people of the Ivory Coast caught in the middle. Joining me now by phone from Liberia in West Africa, which borders the Ivory Coast, is Caroline Gluck from the international aid agency Oxfam. Caroline, thanks for joining me. Can you give us a picture of the devastation this 5-month conflict has brought to the Ivory Coast?
Yeah, it's a very serious humanitarian situation at the moment. Since military fighting first broke out just over a month ago in Ivory Coast, we've seen as many as 1 million displaced from the commercial capital, Abidjan itself. And then here, I'm speaking to you on the border in Liberia, in Grandjede County, we've had tens of thousands of people fleeing across the border. In all, the United Nations estimates more than 100,000 people have fled here to Liberia. Several thousand others are also heading to other neighboring countries like Ghana, for example. So a lot of displacement and a lot of people who fled with literally nothing but the clothes on their backs. They've got no shelter, no food. Some of them are sick. They've got young children. So the needs are quite extensive.
What's the level of casualties? You've mentioned numbers of displaced people. Have you any idea what the level of casualties are from people caught up in the conflict?
It's hard to say. There are cases, though, where people have been injured. I went to a hospital here this morning and I met one man who had been shot at. He lost 2 fingers and the gunshot actually went through his hand and hit his sister, who he thinks is dead. He fled the scene because it was very intense fighting. The hospital told me that they had treated at least 15 people for gunshot wounds. Also, there are stories of women who were pregnant who gave birth when they were in the bush because many had to walk here a journey of 4 or 5 days. They gave birth, but many are seriously ill because they lost a lot of blood. They've had to have blood transfusions and they're anemic. So people are obviously quite shaken, and people who've already been weakened are facing serious problems at the moment. There are some children who are being treated for malnutrition, for example.
What is the level of fear in the country, Caroline, as this conflict looks as though possibly it may be coming to a climax?
Well, it looks like the battle is now for Abidjan, which is quite far from where we are in the border area. The people here have been living in western towns and they fled as the fighting continued, as troops loyal to Ouattara made their way towards Abidjan and also towards the port of San Pedro. So it looks like the fighting has actually shifted now to Abidjan. So those people affected by the fighting are more likely to head to Ghana, not here. I think people, once they've reached Liberia, do feel safe. They feel that they're getting some help. The host communities have opened up their homes, have opened up their hearts to these people. They've been helping feed them. They've been giving them some clothing, basically what they have. But the trouble is, these are poor communities. They're largely subsistence farmers. They don't have very much, and they're running out of food now. So not only is it a refugee problem, it's also a problem of helping some very poor Liberian families who've been helping to host these thousands of refugees.
There seems to be conflicting reports coming out of the country of alleged possible human rights violations by either side's forces. How can, what information can you give us about these allegations?
Obviously, when the situation calms down, human rights organisations are going to be investigating. There have already been calls for investigations of particular incidents. That's not our remit. We're a humanitarian organisation, and our focus is on water, sanitation, health, providing support for poor people in terms of their livelihoods. And our focus right now is to try and get help to not only some of the refugees who've been displaced, but some of the host communities who are facing a very difficult situation at the moment.
Are you able to assess the damage to the civilian and economic infrastructure to this once actually prosperous country, which is also, of course, the world's leader in cocoa production?
For several weeks, there's been no money available. The banks have all been closed. Everything has come to a standstill. So it will have a huge economic impact, not just in the country itself, but regionally as well. It will have quite a long-term impact.
How difficult is your job and other agencies similar to you there on the ground?
At the moment, to travel to some of these areas is quite difficult. The roads are really bad. Let me give you an example. We're working in a border town called Bawade, which is about 6 kilometers from the border with Ivory Coast. The first time we tried to bring in a truck carrying water so that we could provide water supplies to a village which has only one functioning water pump at the moment. And it had rained heavily overnight. The truck got stuck and it actually overturned. And we had to wait a second day to do that journey. And that took several hours. So this is not the start of the rainy season. The rainy season actually begins next month. But it just gives you an indication of how bad the roads are and how things really change when the heavy rains come, which is why we're saying that we have a small, limited window of opportunity to help people right now. We'd really like to get people to areas where we can help them effectively, and we need help to do that. We need money now, not in several months' time when it's too late. The situation is happening right now.
Caroline, what's the greatest relief need right now?
The main issue, I think, is food and shelter and water. As I said, many people are sheltering with host communities. I met one family, there were 35 people living in one room, and they said when it doesn't rain, they can sleep outside. When it does rain, there isn't enough space for them even to lie down on mats. They're having to sit bolt upright and try and get some sleep. Clearly, that's not a sustainable long-term solution. And people aren't getting regular distributions at the moment. They're very far from where the sites are. So we need to kind of step up. We need to get these distributions going more effectively. And we can't really do that when people are dispersed in so many areas.
As we said, you are in neighbouring Liberia. We understand that over 70,000 people have crossed over the border from the Ivory Coast to Liberia. What sort of effect does that have on neighbouring countries when such a huge amount of people cross over the border? It must put a terrible strain on those countries as well.
Actually, it's over 100,000 who've crossed in the last month. It does put a strain on the community. Liberia experienced its own civil war, and I think that's one reason why communities have been so generous. During Liberia's own war, many people went to Ivory Coast seeking shelter themselves, so they're repaying that generosity. They've really done what they can to help these displaced people, giving them food, giving them shelter, and sometimes even giving them clothes. But, as I said, these communities are very poor. They're suffering as well, and they also need help. So I think at the moment, people are doing what they can in very difficult situations, but it's not a long-term solution.
Are you able to say, in the long term, as and when this conflict hopefully comes to an end, how long will it take this country to get back on its feet? It must be absolutely devastated.
It looks like the end might be soon because the battle now is for Abidjan, the most populous city in Ivory Coast, and it's where both presidents are at the moment. It's a battle for power. If that happens, and if that happens quickly, and if it looks like calm is being restored, most people will pick up and go back home as quickly as possible. Many were separated from family members. They don't know if they're dead or alive. They want to get back home and see what's happened. They want to restart their lives as well. They want to start earning money. So I think once the political situation is sorted, and if calm does come to Ivory Coast soon, then I think these people can get back quickly, and they want to get back quickly.
And final question to you, Caroline. Thank you for joining us. How can people help?
People can help by being generous and digging into their pockets. Obviously, there have been a lot of terrible tragedies around the world in recent months. But we've been saying for a while that this is in danger of being an overlooked emergency. People here are desperately poor. They are in need. And if people can give some money, we would be extremely grateful for any help we can get.
Caroline Gluck from the international aid charity Oxfam from Liberia. Thank you for joining us on Track 180 today. And for more on the Ivory Coast, don't forget to check out our country track line here on track180.com.